Welcome to the Book of Mormon Evidence Podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 48, Moroni 7 through 9. May Christ lift thee up. This is part 2 of the Palmyra Legacy with Lori Bean Henderson. Willard and Rebecca Bean have gained much attention over the years with awesome praise and adoration. Granddaughter Lori Bean Henderson has shared the inspiring true story of their extraordinary 24-year mission in Palmyra, New York, the longest mission in the history of the church. At firm foundation conferences and firesides for many years, their story is an example of how the Lord can take an ordinary man and prepare him for an extraordinary purpose. Willard was a kind man, a humble man, a man with deep passion for the gospel and an astounding knowledge of the scriptures. He was a man of great wit and genuine humor, a writer, an actor, and a comedian. He was the first member of the church to do real research into evidences of the Book of Mormon in the Great Lakes region. He was a distinguished speaker and theologian, a defender of truth. He was active in community service in Palmyra, even a leader of the community organizations. Rebecca was the epitome of charity, of loving kindness, always engaged in service to God in the church and in the community. Together they raised their family to be patient, tolerant, and kind in a hostile environment. Their unshakable testimonies, extraordinary courage, faith, and reliance on the sustaining power of the Savior, and their love unfeigned for everyone, is inspiring and empowering for all. The Palmyra Legacy neither begins nor ends with this exceptional couple. There is much more to be appreciated as the history of Palmyra unfolds.
Today I have my dear friend Lori Bean Henderson. Now I want to kind of turn a little bit more of our attention back to the Hill Cumorah, because this is such an important aspect of the Book of Mormon. It's such an important place for where two ancient civilizations actually met their end. The Jaredite civilization and also the Nephite, and that may have ramifications for our civilization too. And so I wanted to point out, if you have your annotated Book of Mormon here with you, if you can turn back to page 441. This is Mormon chapter 6, basically area, but it asks the question: where is the Hill Cumorah? And that has been a big feature, because it comes down to this, and that is that if the Hill Cumorah in New York is the actual hill where the final battles took place, then that really is like 4,000 miles away from Central America, or Mesoamerica, which is Guatemala and southern Mexico and so forth, and that would make it virtually impossible for the Book of Mormon to have happened down there. So in order to accommodate the theory of the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, which by the way has no basis in any church history or anything like that as far as that's concerned, they had to kind of manufacture this idea of that, the Hill Cumorah in New York isn't the real Hill Cumorah. The real Hill Cumorah is down in Central America someplace. And this was just a symbolic hill. But at some point Moroni wandered up here 4,000 miles with a set of 60, 70 pound plates to bring them up here and then deposit them in the Hill Cumorah here in New York, so that Joseph Smith could find them some 1,600 and something years later. Anyway, so this idea, though, of the two Hill Cumorah theory, I got to tell you that even like the Interpreter and Book of Mormon Central and so forth, and their Come Follow Me stuff, they are continued to promote this idea of two Hill Cumorahs, and it's so sad to see how they censor out the things that they don't want people to know. So we want you to know what prophets and apostles and Oliver Cowdery, who was one of the foremost experts on the Book of Mormon, because he was the one with Joseph Smith that basically helped with the translation of the whole thing. And so I want to do this now. I got to tell you, I'm going to share with you now. I have actually, I'm going to be doing an abbreviated version of this. It's called the Hill Cumorah: Verifications and Realistic Archaeological Expectations. Now that's kind of a long title to the thing, but basically this came about, and let me just tell you a little bit really quickly about this. I'm going to go through some slides here, which by the way, these are in this DVD, and the DVD also has some of the most beautiful. Oh my goodness, it is gorgeous. We had some of the most beautiful fall when the trees were all just at their maximum color. It was just amazing how these trees were just beautiful. And then we went out there with the drones and so forth, and Mike and Nancy were out there, and basically took some of the most beautiful aerial footage of the Hill Cumorah that you'll ever see. In fact, we'll play some of that maybe in the background here as we're talking about some of this kind of stuff. But I want to go to the first part of this. Basically, again, it's called the Hill Cumorah Verifications, Realistic Archaeological Expectations. This came about because of the fact that in my first book, the first main book here is called Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland here. This book basically had a whole section about the Hill Cumorah. So as you go into it here about what did Joseph Smith know, talking about a land of promise and what Joseph Smith knew, and so forth. Then it goes into the Zelph accounts here, and then it goes right into the Hill Cumorah. So this was actually part of the original book here, because we have to address this pretty straight on. Where's the Hill Cumorah? Joseph Smith in the Hill Cumorah, and there's some awesome quotes in here, a couple of which I'm going to share with you here in this podcast here. So this is the Hill Cumorah. You'll notice that one of the big things is that it's not a very big hill. I mean, it's kind of relatively large for the area, but there's even bigger hills than it around the area as well. And they go, well, it's kind of like it's kind of diminutive. It's not a very big hill. It's kind of a, it's a glacial drumlin, and we don't have time to go into all the details about that. But basically, after the little ice age basically happened, there was all these glaciers, and they left these big piles of rubble basically in north-south oriented these drumlins basically that makes up the Finger Lakes region of western New York. And so we happen to be at this bookstore. This is the Latter-day Harvest bookstore. It's actually been closed now because of the lack of pageants.
I didn't
Not necessarily lack of tourists. There was lack of pageant because of COVID that messed that up. They've closed that. But I love this store because it was they call it. In fact, if you see up at the top of this, it says we are a One Hill LDS bookstore. And in fact, I'm actually wearing my particular shirt today, which is, I try to wear different shirts for different occasions on who I'm talking to and so forth, but I thought this would be apropos for you.
It is, yeah.
It's called The Firm Foundation, Only One Cumorah. So that's my Only One Cumorah shirt, because there's nowhere in the Book of Mormon where it says anything about two Hill Cumorahs. In fact, it says, if anything, that the Hill Rama of the Jaredites was the Hill Cumorah of the Nephites. Yeah. And they never talk about, there's not anywhere in the Book of Mormon they ever say anything about one hill and a symbolic hill someplace else. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I love that this is my friend Mark. He basically was the one that was running this. We met a bunch of different people, but I had an interesting thing happen to me while we were there doing these book signings and so forth there in the bookstore there in Palmyra. I had a special person come to me, and that's, Mormon. Mormon showed up at the bookstore.
Okay.
So this is Mormon right here. There he is right there. He's the guy who plays Mormon in the pageant. Okay, he played for that year anyway. Okay, so he came in and he was kind of telling me how they have people come in and they have presentations and so forth for the pageant cast members. To kind of take up the time and so forth and help them learn more about the Hill Cumorah. Well, they had some guy who'd gone in there and had told everybody that the Hill Cumorah here in New York was not really the Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon. The real Hill Cumorah was down in Central America. This was just the symbolic hill up here in New York. And he said, I just felt so weird to me. I'd never really heard that before about this two Cumorah theory, that had been brought up by a bunch of intellectuals who were trying to basically accommodate the Central American ideas. And we've addressed that ad infinitum and lots of other things. But anyway, so I proceeded to tell him, well, do you know about the accounts from Oliver Cowdery in Letter 7? He said, well, no. And so he started telling me that. Anyway, by the time we were done, he said, you got to come and tell the pageant cast members about this. So he actually made arrangements. So Mormon actually made arrangements for me to come and speak to the pageant cast members. This is in Pavilion or something like that. Yeah, the Study Pavilion, I think it was called. Anyway, this just showing a couple of pictures of the pavilion there where everybody from the pageant cast can come and learn more about things. I ended up doing about a 2.5 hour, almost a 3 hour long presentation there for the cast members there. about the Hill Cumorah. Where's the evidence? I mean, people want to know, if the Book of Mormon actually ended here, if this is where the final battles were, there's a whole bunch of things like that just don't seem to make sense. Like, for example, the hill's too small to permit such a massive battle to take place on it. The hill's too small to view hundreds of thousands of people dead in such a massive battlefield. There should be millions of human bones, and they haven't been found, and there's no steel swords, and there's no metal armor, like headplates and breastplates have been found, and it's a glacial drumlin. It's not conducive to cave formation, and there was this idea that one of the early accounts talked about it possibly being a cave, and it's not, it's cave happens in what they call karst formations or limestone formations. That caves don't happen in rubble piles.
Yeah.
So these were some of the questions that they wanted to have addressed. And so basically, because of my scientific background and working with the Universal Model and things like that, I decided to take this project on. So it was really kind of fun. So we had a good time. Later on, I then re-recorded this at one of our conferences, and then we made it into the DVD. But I just want to kind of just very quickly, the DVD's longer and we can take more time, but there's just a few things I wanted to share with you. So, for example, this is in regard to the Hill Cumorah. There's been at least 4 or 5 different Hill Cumorahs identified down in Central America by these Mesoamerican advocates. And I've actually even read, there was one time there was an article by anti-Mormons that was called 1 Cumorah, 2 Cumorah, 3 Cumorah, 4. How many more?
Yeah.
They are an embarrassment to the church with their continued promoting and pushing of the Central American idea that Guatemala is the promised land of the Book of Mormon and not the United States of America. That the prophecies and the promises that are contained in the Book of Mormon apply better to Guatemala than they do here to America. Anyway, so it's kind of a sad thing, but they're still promoting that idea. It's old and it's tired and it's time for it to be retired permanently. But anyway, but they're still pushing it, so we'll see what happens. So what exactly does the Book of Mormon account say about the final battles? For example, what would we expect to find? In Mormon chapter 6, it talks about that we might gather together our people to the land of Cumorah by a hill which was called Cumorah. There we would give them battle. So it was the land of Cumorah as well as just the hill itself that they were being talking about here. Mormon chapter 6, verse 4, it says, "It came to pass that we did march forth to the land of Cumorah. We did pitch our tents round about the hill Cumorah." So that's where their tents were. They weren't on the hill necessarily. They were around the perimeter of the hill, apparently. And it was a land of many waters, rivers, and fountains. And here we had hoped to gain advantage over the Lamanites. So this is where they had been. Then a couple of verses later, it says, "It came to pass that when we had gathered all our people to the land of Cumorah, behold, I, Mormon, began to be old." I can imagine. He's starting to feel old. We just read a couple of the epistles that he sent to Moroni, and he wasn't expecting to live through some of these final battles here. He says, and he knowing it was the last struggle of my people, and being commanded of the Lord that I should not suffer the records which have been handed down to fall into the hands of the Lamanites, he says, "Therefore I made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and hid up in the hill Cumorah all the records which have been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord, save it were these few plates which I gave to Moroni, his son." Okay. So where were all of the record of the Nephites? They were in the hill Cumorah. Okay. And so that's a real important aspect of this. And it says, "It came to pass," and this is verse 7, says that every soul was filled with terror because of the greatness of their numbers. And I kind of go into some of the things that were being used in that final battle were swords and bows and arrows and axes and all manners of weapons of war. And then they talked about that they did behold from the top of the hill Cumorah 10,000 of his people hewn down. And then he also talks about the 10,000 of his people and 10,000 of Gidgiddonah, and here's a whole bunch of other ones, and 10 more, and they're 10,000 each. We're talking about a massive battle here. In fact, they talked about the great battle at Cumorah, probably the biggest battle that had ever happened in their history, was there in Cumorah. And then it says but there was a few people who escaped to the south countries. And this is one of the key factors right here that we understand. Now, when the Jaredites had their war of extinction and extermination, basically, who was left? They fought down to like one guy. Right. Okay, yeah. Coriantumr, right? Mm-hmm. And he was the last guy. Was he going to go bury hundreds of thousands of people,
Impossible.
there'd be no way for him to do that. So they just were left on the ground, and that's what they did. In the case of the Nephites, did the Lamanites care about the dead Nephites?
Yeah.
Heck no,
so.
they didn't care. So this is what it says that they did. It says, their flesh and their bones and blood lay upon the face of the earth, being left by the hands of those who slew them, to molder upon the land and to crumble and to return to Mother Earth. So these were never buried. So basically, what I did is I asked the pageant cast members, I said, if a cow was to wander off over here and go die, how long would it be before you would find no evidence of that cow ever existing?
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be very long. I mean, within a year or two, the maggots and everything else and the other vermin and so forth that come in, plus you got chemical and biological degradation of the fleshy materials. It gets down to the bones. The bones then freeze and thaw and so forth, and they basically break down quickly over time to the point where they just turn into kind of a white powdery dust, almost like a calcium carbonate powder, basically. And that is not going to be found after about 4 or 5 years. So if anybody's expecting, so these are unrealistic expectations of people finding stuff. So when your grandfather was there at the Hill Cumorah, I mean, he didn't, when he was farming, how many times did he say, yeah, I dug up a whole bunch of bones from people and so forth. You're not going to find bones. But you were telling me about something though so tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, my dad and Grandpa, when they were out plowing the fields, they dug up a skeleton that was 8 feet tall. And he had a sword.
This is your dad?
Yeah, my dad tells the story. Yeah, he was with his dad. They were working together, and they dug up this huge skeleton, 8 feet tall, and had a very large, heavy sword buried with him. And Grandpa was an athlete. He was a strong man. Yet it took 2 hands for him to lift that sword. And then,
this is still even into the 1900s.
Yeah, this is in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah, late 1920s.
So still finding stuff back there. Yeah.
And then about the same time, I think I read that it was 1925. Grandpa said that there was a guy in the vicinity. Lots of the farmers around were digging up bones still. But there was this one man who dug down deep to dig a well, and uncovered a whole mass of bones. I mean, it's still intact, and they were, 7, 8 feet tall. My dad said this one that they dug up had the head was the size of a basketball. And, in fact, he and his brothers, they would find skulls and just wear them on their heads, and they'd play war.
What?
So, yeah. Yeah.
So seriously,
I guess maybe they reenacted these battles. I don't know. But they'd wear the skull over their head.
Skull over their head.
Yeah. And I believe it's in this book. In this book, there's records. And they measured them. These people who found them, in the 1600s,
they were
1700s.
huge. Yeah,
they had measurements, and they said they'd fit over a human head.
Yeah. That could have been some of the Jaredites or whatever, possibly, or the Nephites. I mean, basically. It talks about the Jaredites being very large in stature, and also, but it talks about Nephi. He was large in stature, and then Mormon Moroni said they were large in stature. Yeah. I don't think they were just bragging about how big of guys they were. I think that they were trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
Because if you've ever seen Mayan people, I don't know if you've ever been down to Central America. I mean, most of the men will never make it past about 5.5 feet tall, and most of the women are barely even 5, or some of them even like 4.5 feet tall. They are not what you'd call large in stature in anybody's book. Yeah. So that's another interesting aspect. And actually, if you take a look at the Algonquin-speaking language group of Native American Indians, like the Sioux and the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the Ojibwe, and other these tribes that are part of the Algonquin group, most of them are, most of the men are 6 foot or bigger, and a lot of the women are in that same size range. So they are actually large in stature.
Yeah.
But there was something else you were telling me that just before we started the podcast about deposits of things and so forth. What was that about?
Deposit? You mean? Are you talking
like bones and so forth? I mean, you talked about some bones, but also about calcium carbonate deposits.
Yeah. So my dad was very excited. He said, while they lived there, farmers would always come and take soil from around the Hill Cumorah and back to their farms and use it as fertilizer. And I think it was like around 1975. It was in the 70s. I remember he was very excited to learn that suddenly it had become deplete. And so University of Rochester came and got some soil and studied it to see why has it been so rich for all these years, and what.
Yeah, because there's no real deposits of calcium carbonate around there.
Yeah, and so they studied it and determined that that what it was human bone. So you said you know the scientific words for the breakdown of human bones, but that's what it was.
Yeah. Wow. So basically, they were doing a geological kind of a study basically of the soils there, and they found high concentrations of calcium carbonate, which is basically from the breaking down of human bones. They were saying. Yeah. This is what your dad was telling you. Yeah, he would. I vaguely remember. He told my husband. He and Matt went back there, just the two of them together once, and Dad gave him tours and stuff. So so he told it to my husband. I also remember him just being very excited about that discovery. Yeah, because I think James E. Talmage actually had some geological work and so forth done there as well, and found the same kind of thing. So let me get to a couple more things here I wanted to share with you. In the Book of Ether, it talks about the hill Ramah is the same hill as the hill Cumorah of the Nephites. So in summary, what exactly does the Book of Mormon account say about the final battle? The Nephites were given time to gather. They built defensive measures as best as they could. The hill Ramah of the Jaredites was the hill Cumorah of the Nephites. The number of men plus women and children, there's high and low estimates that from depends on a lot of different things, but basically it could be from a few 100,000 people to there could have been as much as maybe 2 million combatants there. Wow. Between the Lamanites and the Nephites. The result of the battle is neither the Jaredites or the Nephites were buried. They were left to mold and return to Mother Earth. If they're not buried, folks, their bones are not going to be maintained. I mean, they're just not. The bones just fall apart. Now, if they're buried at least below the frost line, then the bones will actually last for a very long time, which is why you still find bones, but they have to be buried in order to do that. Yeah. And then there was this repository, a room of records that was in the hill. So one of the next things that we wanted to find out is what did prophets and apostles and other church leaders had to say about the Hill Cumorah, New York. This is the thing that you will probably never hear from Book of Mormon Central or the Interpreter or other groups who are promoting the Central American theories, is these prophetic quotes. One of the most powerful ones actually is from Letter 7. I'll just really quickly about Letter 7. Letter 7 was actually Oliver Cowdery was given the job by Joseph Smith to write the early history of the church, and he did so in a series of 8 letters. In the 7th of those 8 letters, he actually wrote these things about the Hill Cumorah. And now this is a guy that knows. I mean, he was considered in fact Joseph Smith called him like a co-president of the church at the time. And he had just helped with the translation of the Book of Mormon. He and Joseph were very close. And in fact, Oliver Cowdery goes in and he actually talks about the fact that these letters wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Joseph Smith and his input into these letters. Joseph Smith was so impressed by Oliver's letters and this history of the church that he actually had them republished 3 different times. So if Joseph Smith didn't agree with it, why would he have them redone over and over and over again? But I want to share with you, though, a couple of things that Oliver Cowdery put into letter number 7, which I think is absolute evidence that this 2 Cumorah theory is time that it's basically is done away with. There is no 2 Cumorahs, or else we have to say that Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith didn't know what they were talking about. So either we believe Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, or we believe some scholars who basically disagree with them. I'm in the camp of staying with Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. Here's how he says, letter 7, he says, quote, "I must now give you some description of the place where and the manner in which these records were deposited." He's talking about the gold plates here. "You are acquainted with the mail road from Palmyra, Wayne County to Canandaigua, Ontario County, New York. And also as you pass from the former to the latter place, before arriving at the little village of Manchester, say about 3 or 4 or about 4 miles from Mount Palmyra, you pass a large hill on the east side of that road. About 1 mile west of that hill rises another ridge of less height, running parallel with the former, leaving a beautiful vale or valley in between. The soil is of first quality for the country, and under a state of cultivation, which gives a prospect at once imposing, when one reflects on the fact. Now here Oliver Cowdery says that he's calling this a fact, and Joseph Smith has now, he apparently didn't change this, so Joseph Smith must agree with this is a fact, that here between these two hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and the Nephites were destroyed.
Such a powerful.
I think that's just absolutely just crystal clear. By turning to the 529th and 530th pages of the Book of Mormon, you have to realize here, let me grab this real quick here, behind here, this is a replica of the original 1830 copy of the Book of Mormon. So he's actually referencing these particular pages. He doesn't talk about it in terms of books and chapters, because in the original book it wasn't this way. So you had to basically refer to things as the 529th and 530th pages. So that's basically what he's talking about here. He says, you will read Mormon's account of the last great struggle of his people as they were encamped round about this hill Cumorah. In this valley fell the remaining strength and pride of a once powerful people, the Nephites, once so highly favored of the Lord, but at that time in darkness doomed to suffer extermination by the hand of their barbarous and uncivilized brethren. He says, from the top of this hill, Mormon, with a few others after the battle, gazed with horror upon the mangled remains of those who, the day before, were filled with anxiety, hope, or doubt. This hill by the Jaredites was called Ramah. By it or around it pitched the famous army of Coriantumr their tent. The opposing army were to the west and in this same valley and nearby. Any questions about this? This is about as straightforward and clear as you can possibly be. He says, in this same spot, in full view from the top of this same hill, one may gaze with astonishment upon the ground which was twice covered with the dead and dying of our fellow men. This is absolutely clear, especially when you understand there's Palmyra, you have the sacred grove, and where it's located, you have Cumorah, and you have the hill Shem. So Cumorah is just south of Palmyra, and a little bit to the east there, and then Shem, the hill Shem, would be on the west side of the valley, and it's in this valley where this all basically took place. And Oliver Cowdery he wasn't expressing his opinion. Joseph Smith helped him to originally write these things, and then Joseph Smith had these republished. So clearly Joseph Smith agreed with that, and apparently the Lord does too.
Okay. Let's see.
Because in section 128 in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says, again, what do we hear? Glad tidings from Cumorah. And Cumorah is associated here with Fayette, Seneca County, the banks of the Susquehanna. Talks about Peter, James, and John in the wilderness between Harmony, Susquehanna County, and Colesville, Broome County on the Susquehanna River. These are not places in Guatemala or southern Mexico. No. These are places in New York where your grandfather served those 24 years with his family, and reclaiming this sacred space for the church and throughout its history. I love this quote by Elder Mark E. Peterson. This was in a general conference address back in April of 1953. He says, I do not believe that there are two hill Cumorahs, one in Central America and the other one up in New York, for the convenience of the prophet Joseph Smith, so the poor boy would not have to walk clear to Central America to get the gold plates. I love that. Mark E. Peterson was very clear. And then this is even more damaging here, because folks, this is the sad part. This idea of the two Cumorah theory actually is damaging to the church and its members. And in case anybody's wondering about if that is the case, here is President Joseph Fielding Smith, and his this was actually in his book that he wrote, Doctrines of Salvation, basically. But he writes this. He says, this modernistic theory, this two Cumorah theory, of necessity, in order to be consistent, must place the waters of Ripliancum and the hill Cumorah someplace within the restricted territory of Central America. I love this. Notwithstanding the teachings of the church to the contrary for upwards of 100 years. So the church for over 100 years taught that this is the hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon, but there's some scholars who think that they know more than the prophets and Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. Because of this True Cumorah theory, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. Why would it cause confusion and so forth on the Book of Mormon? Because if you put the Book of Mormon in Central America, there is no archaeological evidence that really clearly supports the Book of Mormon. There's no DNA evidence. The linguistics don't match up down there. The plants and animals and so forth. I mean, nothing matches up down there. And so when you try to force that round peg into a square hole, it just doesn't work. It is for this reason, he says, this is Joseph Fielding Smith, that evidence is here presented to show that it is not only possible that these places could be located as the church has held during the past century, in other words, in North America, but that in very deed such is the case. It is known that the hill Cumorah where the Nephites were destroyed is the hill where the Jaredites were also destroyed. This hill was known by the Jaredites as Ramah, is approximately near to the waters of Ripliancum, which the Book of Ether says by interpretation is large or to exceed all. It must be conceded that this description fits perfectly the land of Cumorah, New York. As it has been known since the visitation of Moroni to the prophet Joseph Smith, for the hill is in the proximity of the Great Lakes. It talks about the great waters, basically, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Large bodies of water, it talks about several times in the Book of Mormon. And also in the land of many rivers and fountains. Moreover, the prophet Joseph Smith himself is on record, definitely declaring the present hill called Cumorah to be the exact hill spoken of in the Book of Mormon. Further, the fact that all of his associates from the beginning down have spoken of it as an identical hill where Mormon and Moroni hid the records must carry some weight. It is difficult for a reasonable person to believe that such men as Oliver Cowdery, Brigham Young, Partly P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, David Whitmer, and many others could speak frequently of the spot where the Joseph Smith obtained the plates as the hill Cumorah and not be corrected by the prophet if that wasn't the fact. Okay? That they did speak of this hill in the days of the prophet in this definite manner is an established record of history. There's also an interesting quote that you wanted to share here with from Brigham Young.
Okay.
And it's right there. So.
Oh, you've got this. Okay. Oliver Cowdery went with the prophet Joseph when he deposited these plates. Joseph did not translate all of the plates. There was a portion of them sealed, which you can learn from the Book of Doctrine and Covenants. When Joseph got the plates, the angel instructed him to carry them back to the hill Cumorah, which he did. Oliver says that when Joseph and Oliver went there, the hill opened, and they walked into a cave in which there was a large and spacious room. He says he did not think at the time whether they had the light of the sun or artificial light, but that it was just as light as day. They laid the plates on a table. It was a large table that stood in the room. Under this table there was a pile of plates as much as 2 feet high, and there were altogether in this room more plates than probably many wagon loads. They were piled up in the corners and along the walls.
Yes, and so that basically is a little bit from Brigham Young about that actual place as well. This letter right here is basically one that was obtained by Bishop Darrell L. Brooks from the Moore Ward in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma South Stake. This is clear back in 1990, and he asked, basically, is the hill Cumorah in New York the hill of the Book of Mormon? And the church responded back. This is from Michael Watson, the secretary to the First Presidency, and he wrote back, he said, the church has long maintained, as attested to by reference in the writings of general authorities, that the hill Cumorah in western New York State is the same as referenced in the Book of Mormon, period. So that's a pretty important stuff. Some people have tried to say, well, Michael Watson, he just was on his own. He went rogue. He didn't actually take this to the First Presidency. He has actually claimed quite the opposite. So yeah, he totally disagrees with that. He was saying he was basically giving the First Presidency's understanding.
Sorry.
That's lovely.
I know. I'm supposed to feed my chickens right now.
Oh, okay.
That's the bird sound.
I turned
That's
the
the bird
volume
sound.
off. I didn't know the alarm would go off. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's the alarm.
They're important.
What do I do?
Well, the food for the chickens is important.
I'm gonna turn my phone completely off.
Okay, so actually, this is a letter that was obtained back in 1990 by Bishop Darrell L. Brooks, and it was actually signed by the secretary to the First Presidency, F. Michael Watson, And he basically says, right out, he says, the church has long maintained, as attested to by references in the writings of general authorities, that the hill Cumorah in western New York State is the same as referenced in the Book of Mormon. Same hill. And people said, well, he was just expressing his own personal opinion and so forth. It's kind of interesting because they never really wanted to accept the fact that he himself basically said that's baloney. I would never have put anything in there that was my own opinion, and then say that it was the First Presidency's idea. So that was clearly run past the First Presidency, and then he wrote the letter as the secretary to respond back to that. So there's some unrealistic expectations of the hill. So for example, the size of the hill is too small, that they can't see millions of people from that vantage point on the top of the hill. Steel swords have not been found, no metal armor, and no bones. But actually, when we go through and explain all that, basically, number one, we know that the size of the hill is not the most important thing. It's whether or not it is a good place to view from and kind of watch over the battles and so forth from the top. Yeah. You can't see millions of massive people from that. Let's go through this really quickly. Number one, the hill's too small. It is a relatively small hill. It's not really big, really massive for the area, basically. It's there on the right-hand side. You can kind of see the little kind of a bell-shaped thing coming down of there, so you can kind of see that. But does that mean that it's too small to be the hill Cumorah? I find it interesting, however, that the Book of Mormon never calls it the mountain Cumorah.
Right.
It was a hill.
Yeah.
Okay, a hill is smaller than a mountain, as everyone knows. Yeah. The hill's too small to view hundreds of thousands of dead. Well, this is actually from the Battle of Gettysburg. This is actually a page from the Exploring the Book of Mormon in America's Heartland book. And there was Little Round Top and Big Round Top. You can see that in the lower image. Big Round Top was a taller mountain, but they actually used Little Round Top here in the Battle of Gettysburg as their strategic lookout. And the reason why is pretty simple. Big Round Top had trees all over it, and they couldn't see off of it. Little Round Top was kind of denuded on the top, and so they could see off of it, so it made a better vantage point. So the size of the hill does not a strategic location make. So basically the point is that the hill Cumorah can still be a strategic location, even though it may not be really that tall. But nevertheless, this is a view from the top of the hill Cumorah. You can see an awful long ways. You can almost see to Rochester, which is about 30 miles away from here, or 25 miles away or so from the hill. And you can see down all the way to Rochester. These valleys would certainly be big enough to watch, several 100,000 people down there fighting it out and so forth. There's no issues with that. So that's just a bogus reason to disbelieve the Book of Mormon account, and that this is the hill Cumorah. Millions of human bones have not been found. Well, we kind of addressed that already, but I'll just address this a little bit more. The bison. In one of my first DVDs, I actually talked about the 60 million bison that had roamed the plains at one point in time. Yeah. They were slaughtered by the millions, literally. Somewhere between 30 and 60 million. Experts disagree on how many might have been there. But the bottom line is a buffalo is a lot bigger animal with a lot heavier, thicker bones than a human is. Where's all their bones today? If all these animals got shot, most of them were just left to die. They cut their tongue out sometimes, and they have that as a delicacy back east and so forth. But they mostly did this to basically deny the Native Americans from their ability to live. Yeah. So after their food supply was done, they could easily just round them up and put them on reservations because they were starving to death. So that was one of the main purposes of that. But even this is in Yellowstone. This is just showing how quickly carcasses decay. And this is only about, this is in the first year. This is after a couple of years. And this is what it looks like about 3 years after an animal had died. They actually have documented these things. So this is interesting to see. There's hardly anything left. Yeah. What about steel swords? Well, number one, steel doesn't last for very long. Steel actually rusts. And so as a quick example, it's Joseph Smith's sword, talking about that. But this is a 17th century sword. Look at how much is left. Wow. Okay. They fall apart really quickly, especially out in this wet, damp climate that they have back east. Yeah. And also, many of their swords weren't steel. They were copper. It talks about their head plates and breastplates and so forth were primarily out of copper. Now, copper is going to last, though. So this gives you an idea of some of the swords, and these are not as old as the Book of Mormon time frame swords, and yet see, look at how badly those are completely falling apart here, and that's probably a better quality of steel than maybe the Nephites may have had. What about metal armor and head plates and breastplates and so forth? Where's all that? And so that's another interesting thing. When it comes down to it, here we have a little depiction here of these battles going on with the steel swords and breastplates and armor. But you have to remember, folks, that who had the bigger army there, the Lamanites or the Nephites? The Lamanite army was probably 3 to 4 times the size of the Nephites' army, right?
I didn't remember that.
So after the Nephites basically were completely killed off, you'd have had 3 or 4 times their number of Lamanites. What's the chances that a Lamanite warrior was going to say, you know what, that guy, he's about my size. I think I'll just take that guy's armor right there. I'll put it on myself. Oh, this head plate, man, it just fits just right on me. Or whatever. It's called the spoils of war. But if there's so many more of them than there were of the Nephites, how many of these armor pieces are going to be remaining? Like none. They're going to strip every one of those bodies down, get whatever they want off of them, their shoes or whatever else they want, and leave them there to rot, to return to Mother Earth. So you're not going to find a lot of stuff, but you may have some stuff. Some stuff might have gotten destroyed to the point where it was just kind of useless. Well, this head plate's been split in half. It's probably not much good anymore. We'll just leave that there. But there really wouldn't be hardly anything left. The Lamanites would haul it all off, and then where do they live? Hundreds and hundreds of miles away and spread all over the land. So you wouldn't really find much of that. And that's what you would expect from ancient warfare. I mean, you just don't find a lot of stuff laying around, especially if you have one of the armies is overwhelmingly bigger and most of them live.
Yeah.
If you have a close battle, then maybe there's just too much. One guy can't use 10 sets of armor. But if it's the other way around, that would be easy to do. This is just kind of just showing what as they found their loved ones and family members and so forth on the battlefield. If the glacial drum is not conclusive of cave formation, that's true. But again, although that account talks about it being a cave, it says it was a room. And it was a room, basically, if it was a room, it was man-made. It wasn't a natural cave. It was a room that was put into the hill that stored all of the records, which actually, here's again some really old aerial pictures of the Hill Cumorah before they started planting more trees and so forth on it. This was actually, kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like without trees. Now there's so many trees you can't tell where the hill part is, except for where they cut it out for the pageant. But this is what it did look like. Summary, there's been a bunch of unrealistic expectations about the size of the hill. They can't see millions and so forth. All of those things, none of those really hold any water. So is there any things that would be unexpected here? This says, oh, so you're still hoping and clinging to unrealistic expectations? That's adorable. Anyway, so what kind of expectations would we have then, truly based on the text? We should find arrowheads. Arrowheads by the tens of thousands, maybe by the hundreds of thousands, because those are too small. They're not going to, they might take some of the good arrows that were left, but ones that get broken or damaged or whatever, they're just going to leave them there. Or if they get stuck in a body, they're going to sit there and pull them all out, probably. Yeah. So there'd be lots of arrowheads. There'd probably be some defensive structures left. So things like rock walls or something that the Nephites, they had, several years basically to prepare for the onslaught of the Lamanites. They actually allowed them to go there and kind of prepare because they knew this was it. They were going to annihilate them and so forth. So there may be some defensive structures, and of course, and there are. Repository of records was there. So if there is a repository of records in the Hill Cumorah, maybe there would be some evidence for that. And that's basically, so those are a couple of things that you might expect to find if the Book of Mormon actually did happen, and if it did happen, and these battles happened here at the Hill Cumorah, and it's the real Hill Cumorah of the Book of Mormon, then maybe these things should be the case. And as it turns out, the arrowheads have been found by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of arrowheads. In fact, this is an account here by George Albert Smith. This evidence of the great battles that have been fought there in days gone by are manifest by the numerous spear and arrowheads that have been found by farmers plowing in the neighborhood. That's from George Albert Smith Conference Report in April 1906. Mm-hmm. So unless George Albert Smith was lying, which I doubt highly.
Well, Willard and my dad and the kids found arrowheads all the time. One of their favorite pastimes was to skip arrowheads on Lake Ontario.
Really? Mm-hmm. There's so many arrowheads they just use them as skipping rocks.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my word! And your family even has arrowheads and so forth still from there.
Yeah.
I know that there was accounts where there were so many arrowheads that farmers, almost every farmer in the whole area, had huge collections of these things, and it was so common they would trade them for marbles and whatever else because they were just everywhere. But also, there was a point in time when the church finally got the Hill Cumorah, they put at the first visitor center. They had a barrel apparently. For about 15 years, they had this barrel outside. People can put their arrowheads in there. The farmers could, and members of the church coming through the area, as a memento of coming to the Hill Cumorah, could pick out an arrowhead from the area. Yeah. For 15 years, this went on. Wow, amazing! It's pretty cool. Yeah. Defensive structures, stone walls and ditches and so forth around the temple and sacred grove. It turns out, this is from the life of Heber C. Kimball. Mounds at Cumorah says, in the towns of Bloomfield, Victor, Manchester, and other regions round about, there were hills upon the tops of which were entrenchments and fortifications. In them were human bones, axes, tomahawks, points of arrows, beads, and pipes, which were frequently found. It was a common occurrence in the country to plow up axes. This is again from Heber C. Kimball. Mm-hmm. The Hill Cumorah is a high hill for that country and had the appearance of a fortification or entrenchment around it. That's actually at the base of it. Wayne May has actually been able to find some remnants of that, of some of that, of those ancient entrenchments that they had there. Yeah. In this very region, according to the sacred record, the final battles were fought between the Nephites and the Lamanites. This is from the Life of Heber C. Kimball by Orson F. Whitney. This is a view of a stone wall. Mm-hmm. Guess where this is at, Lori? Do you know where this is at? The Sacred Grove.
Oh, is it? I was going to say on the farm somewhere. Yeah,
this is on the Smith family farm in the Sacred Grove. There's this wall that actually goes for probably about a quarter of a mile. There's a couple of bends and turns and whatever a couple times. But this wall of these stones goes along there. This is actually just outside of the temple.
Yeah,
there.
That one I recognize.
Yeah, those are right here. I've actually followed that one along. In fact, if you get a copy of the Hill Cumorah, I actually have a speeded up version where I took a camera, basically like a GoPro, basically, and went along the entire thing. It's so long that we had to kind of speed it up several times, and then we put it to some music and so forth. And that's when I had the skunk encounter.
I haven't.
You'll see that. You get the DVD, and you'll see the skunk encounter when we're talking about the stone walls there around the hill, around the Palmyra Temple. Just literally outside of the front doors, about probably 40 feet. Is where up on a little bit of a ridge, and then it drops way down into a gully on the other side. So it's actually going along that hillside. Oh. Yeah. So that this is the repository records. Now this one is one that we need to probably clarify a couple things, because actually it was your husband was there, and so can you tell us just really briefly about the story of the discovery of this empty room in the Hill Cumorah?
Yeah. So for several years, and Matt doesn't remember the exact year, but somewhere probably around 2005, give or take. Mm-hmm. For several years he produced the pageants, and when I say that, he was the producer of the technical side of things, lighting.
He was the tech guy, yeah.
And so he was back there with his team setting up for the Palmyra pageant.
Okay.
And it was during rehearsals, and a boy, whether he was in the pageant or his family was, we don't know, but a young boy, they guessed he was maybe around 12 years old. He wandered off on the hill and fell. Yeah,
and I think I got that part of the thing wrong on the DVD. I think I thought it was one of your kids, but it wasn't one of your kids. Let's get this cleared up.
That's what we've heard.
Okay.
Yeah, we've heard different variations of the story.
So we wanted to get it directly from the source here. Yeah.
So no relation at all. He was just there, probably part of the cast, and he wandered off and fell in this hole, and so. Matt's team. Matt wasn't there when it happened. He did come and see the hole. But anyway, they got him out, got this boy out. So it wasn't that deep. He wasn't really hurt.
Yeah.
So Matt's estimate was maybe it was 10 feet square.
Well, and actually there was a couple of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So this first picture is showing what?
So some of the other crew, they put their cameras in and took pictures.
Which is this picture here.
Yeah. And Wayne May was excited to see these, and when we finally found them...
Can you see that picture there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
When we found them, Wayne was able to zoom in more, and of course he knows what he's looking for, and he could see that it was a man-made room, because you could see this piled.
Yeah, you can actually
stacked.
see the stones here are actually stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
Which is how you kind of do it, and you stack them around each other, and then you can put stuff over the top of it. So this boy basically fell through the upper structure of this room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then they called physical facilities, and they came and covered it up.
Which
with
is this
steel,
picture.
Steel plate. Yeah.
The steel plate there.
And now it's overgrown. We've been back and we've tried to see if we could figure out where it was. It's so overgrown now with shrubbery, we can't find it. That's all we know about that. That's our story, and that's it.
Yeah. And there's been some different ideas about why, obviously it was empty.
Mm-hmm.
But when Joseph and the brethren left the area, there's an interesting time frame where basically none of them. Wilford Woodruff, for example, was a really big journal taker, and there was I can't remember now. I think it was Jonathan Neville actually that was helping to try to figure out. But Brigham Young actually talked about several wagon loads of plates.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He may not have been guessing.
No.
They may have moved the plates from this repository before they left. They knew that people were going to come and dig that hill up. Because, it was, they knew where he'd gotten the plates from. So they basically may have removed all of these plates and put them over into the other repository that is talked about by Amaron in the hill Shim, which had been on the west side of the valley over there. Yeah. And basically, so that's why the room of records is currently empty. But it's interesting that it's there. There's the fact that there's something there.
Yeah, I think that's just an example of that there are man-made rooms in that hill. This one didn't seem big enough to hold wagon loads of, and have a table in there and all that.
I said about 10 feet by 10 feet.
room.
I think that some of the other accounts were talking about 16 feet by 16 feet. So that's probably, it's hard to tell from a picture how big it is.
And it could have been a place where they stored weapons or something for war.
Yeah.
Or ammunition or something.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't have ammunition, did they?
Yeah.
More arrowheads.
Well, you could still consider that ammunition. A lot of arrows. I think that's just fascinating, though, that this actually was discovered and found and so forth. And it's there on the Hill Cumorah. Yeah. So does this hill match the realistic expectations of the Hill Cumorah in the text? And the answer, of course, is absolutely it does. Is there any reason to assume that there are two Hill Cumorahs? There is no reason to assume that unless you have an agenda and you want to, basically you're trying to prove a particular point that goes against what Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, and every general authority and so forth in the early history of the church, basically, have said about this place. Is there any scriptural requirement that the plates be buried in a different hill from that of the repository of records? And the answer to that is no. It talks about that the room of records was in the Hill Cumorah, but it says that the plates were placed on the Hill Cumorah. Yeah. So the repository of records would have been in the hill, but the stone box with the actual, gold plates on it, it would have been on the Hill Cumorah. And it makes sense that they would have been on the same hill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. And if there's only one Hill Cumorah, what does it mean for the Mesoamerican theories? It makes it pretty much impossible to try to reconcile all the other issues that you have with the Mesoamerican theories if there's only one Hill Cumorah and it's in New York.
You can click on over to part 3 of the Palmyra Legacy.
To me, this is not just another nation. It is not just one of the family of nations. This is a nation with a great mission to perform for the benefit of liberty-loving people everywhere. It is my firm conviction that the Constitution of this land was established by men whom the God of heaven raised up unto that very purpose. This is part of my religious faith.
Looking forward to 2021, you can buy your annotated Book of Mormons for Christmas gifts and save 21% at bookofmormonevidence.org.